Deliberately misled Congress and the public in its efforts to funnel billions of dollars to Iran as part of the nuclear deal. Correspondent Rich Edson has the specifics tonight from the State Department.
After signing the 2015 nuclear agreement, Iran had a $6 billion problem. The nuclear deal gave Iran access to its international bank accounts. One account in Oman held about $6 billion in local currency. To use it, the Iranians needed to convert that money first to U.S. dollars, then to euros. And the Obama administration was ready to help.
I think they did so because they were desperate to get a deal. So on the one hand, they were saying that the Iranians were not going to get access to the American financial system. On the other hand, they actually granted Iran a specific license to allow them to take some of the funds that had been in escrow.
A report from the Republican majority of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations says the Obama administration bypassed existing sanctions and cleared the way for Iran to use the U.S. financial system, even as officials claimed that would never happen. The Senate report cites pledges from then Treasury Secretary Jack Lew and other top administration officials.
Iran will be denied access to the world's most important market and unable to deal in the world's most important currency.
The report says that in January 2016, Iran complained about its nearly $6 billion stuck in an Oman bank. 1 month later, the Obama Treasury Department issued a license, allowing a transaction the federal government would otherwise prohibit. Officials then tried to persuade 2 U.S. banks to execute it. The report says, quote, both U.S. banks eventually declined, primarily due to the unwillingness to take on the legal and compliance risk, but also reputational concerns in doing business with a comprehensively sanctioned country like Iran. A former administration official refused to go on record, though tells Fox News the license fulfilled U.S. commitments under the nuclear agreement to, quote, give Iran access to pools of its money held overseas. This specific license cannot be described as granting access to the U.S. financial system. As for what happened to that $6 billion in Oman, the report says Iran likely retrieved it, gradually, using European banks. Shannon?
All right, Rich Edson at the State Department. We'll have more on that coming up. Thank you. A report released by Senate Republicans today says the Obama administration deliberately misled the public and Congress by granting a license which would have allowed Iran to access the financial system right here in the U.S. by sidestepping sanctions. Former Obama officials say it was all part of the spirit of the Iran nuclear deal, part of the benefits they promised to Iran. Well, Chairman of the Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, Senator Rob Portman, joins us now to discuss this report that's caught a lot of people by surprise. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So what exactly was going on here? What did you uncover?
Well, we spent 2 years looking at this because we heard rumors that there was some sort of a sanctions violation by the administration, that they had allowed Iran to have access to our financial system. We just did a lot of interviews and talked to a lot of people, and were able to get emails that others had not received. And it became very clear that what happened is that the administration chose to mislead Congress and mislead the American people by saying they're not getting access to the U.S. banks, to the U.S. dollar, to the U.S. financial system, when in fact they granted them a specific license to do so.
We want to play a little bit of what 2 top Treasury officials, including then Secretary of the Treasury Jack Lew, had to say publicly about this.
With very limited exceptions, Iran will continue to be denied access to the world's largest market, and we will maintain powerful sanctions targeting Iran's support for terrorist groups.
Iran will be denied access to the world's most important market and unable to deal in the world's most important currency.
Okay, so that was back in 2015, shortly after the deal had come together. But what you later found is in the spring of 2016, this administration, the previous administration, actually granted a license which would have allowed them to do what they needed to do, which was get the currency translated into something that they could then spend. And they were angry with the administration, or frustrated that they didn't think they were getting what they had agreed to under the deal.
They had $5.8 billion that was in a bank in Oman called the Bank of Muscat. And they wanted to convert that into euros ultimately through dollars. Since they had a dollar-denominated currency, it was better to do through dollars. And so they asked the Treasury Department if they could get the ability to do that. And sure enough, the Treasury Department granted them a license to do it. Now, what's interesting is they went to the 2 big U.S. banks that would be the appropriate banks to do this. Both banks said, no, we want nothing to do with this. This is wrong. In other words, the reputational risk and the legal risk was too high. So ultimately, the dollars were not provided to be able to convert that currency. And over time, they converted it to euros, as we understand it, in small amounts in Europe, much less efficiently. But the point is, At that time, the administration was saying, we're not allowing the U.S. financial system to be used, we're not allowing the dollar to be used, we're keeping all of our sanctions in place. Only the secondary sanctions on others are we allowing the Iranians to have access to, when in fact they were granting this license. So it's just wrong. And look, it's important that we flesh that out, because now, with regard to the next Iran agreement, or with regard to our agreement with North Korea or others, we're going to require more transparency, I hope, and that's part of our recommendations.
Some response to the report today. Ned Price, who of course was part of the Obama administration, says this: they continue to malign the deal in an effort to justify President Trump's unjustifiable decision. Sounds like he's referring there to the fact that President Trump has withdrawn from this deal. But they say this is about besmirching the deal and nothing more.
This investigation is 2 years old. It began long before we knew President Trump would be president, much less that he would pull out of the Iran agreement. But it was done, in a totally straight-up objective way. And, we found that this had occurred, and I think it's important the American people know about it. And that, again, for the future, we have better transparency. Anytime there's this kind of a special license granted, we ought to know about it. Congress ought to know. The American people ought to know. In this case, it was kept from us, I think because, as you said earlier, Iran was frustrated. They were angry. We know this from public documents as well as private documents now. And I think they wanted to be sure Iran would stay with the agreement. And so they were willing to do something that, was counter not just to what they said they were going to do, but counter to the approach here, which was that U.S. sanctions would stay in place.
Is there any legal liability here? What does it say to you more broadly about the previous administration's desire to get and lock in and keep this deal in place?
Well, it says that they were willing to do things that they shouldn't do in order to both get the Iranians to the table and then keep them at the table and hold the agreement. And look, there was a vote in the United States Senate. People forget about this sometimes. The vote was a majority Republican and Democrat vote against the Iran agreement. It wasn't the necessary 2/3, which we had to have had under the rules, but it was a vote against it. Normally, if you have a treaty, of course, you have to have a 2/3 vote in order to approve it. The administration knew they couldn't get that, so they did not seek this to be a treaty. But then when there was a vote on this issue in Congress, sure enough, a majority of the United States Congress said, this is not a good agreement. And I think that's one reason the president chose, because he was able to, without it being a treaty, to pull back and to say, let's put together something that makes more sense.
Well, I know that it's been a long process. It certainly flew under our radar. We had no idea this was in process, but I know that Democrats also worked with you on this. They ultimately chose not to sign the final product, but so folks know they were part of the investigation. Senator Portman, thank you. It's very interesting.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to see you again.
Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.